Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Michelle, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Tab Talks. And my guest today is Julian Johnson. Hey, Julian.
Hey, how are you, Dr. Mobley? Dr. Pierce Mobley.
I know, and that's something we go back a long way. We go back a long way. And when I wanted to talk about policing, you were the first person I thought about.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I spent a good number of years doing that, working for the city of Cincinnati. Well, first I started off, it was a long road to it. So I didn't start off being the police. And I have another career too now, but yeah, I spent a long time in policing. But
okay, well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And I guess before we get started, the obvious thing for me is, why did you go into policing?
And that's how the long road started. Well, my mom, who was a nurse, and she kind of geared me, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And she was like, but you're going to school. So I started in speech pathology and audiology. And that's when I was at the University of Cincinnati, and finished my degree in that, started my master's in it, and hated it because they had me dealing with people that didn't have speech impediments, but really dialectal things like people from India and stuff like that. They had a different dialect. They didn't have a speech impediment. So I didn't really like the program at the graduate level. And so I went back in education, and I started teaching school after that, after I went to graduate school for education. So I taught in the public school system for 9 years, and I would see the resource officers and things like that. And and I've always had a servant's heart, because I think my parents have too. They've always been community council presidents, PTA presidents. We've always wanted to serve. And my brother, who had a degree in criminal justice from Bowling Green, he was a police officer. And so I started looking more at that, and I was like, that's pretty cool. I think I can have my hand on the pulse more if I'm, and I can help more people. And to tell you the truth, being in the classroom, sometimes I used to have to step outside. I needed some adult conversation. I used to be like, okay, I need to talk to some grownups. So I went down and I said, I think I'm going to go to the police academy. And that's how I got into going into law enforcement.
Okay, so that's a good segue. You went to the police academy. Describe that for me. What are the educational requirements to get into the police academy? Obviously, you were master's prepared.
Yeah,
but the time you went.
Yeah, but that's the requirement is a high school diploma. You need to be 21 by the time, I think, of graduating from the academy. And you need to have a valid driver's license and no criminal background, really. And so it's,
Wow. So the audience understands you could be a high school graduate and start as long as you're 21 when you finish. Now, how long does it take to finish?
Well, the particular academy that I went through, and the one here in Cincinnati, is pretty extensive. It was probably 6 months, maybe 8 months of training. And you're in the academy, and that's what you're doing every day. I mean, now they do pay you while you're in the academy. It's not a large amount of money, but you get paid to train. So, and that's what you do every day.
Okay, so you've trained in the academy. Now, according to your bio, and I don't want to miss anything, you started in patrol, you were promoted to sergeant, you've held supervisory roles, and then you ended your career in public service as a public information officer, which I think is pretty cool. So you've had a very successful career, because you certainly had this upward trajectory just from beginning to end. So I guess that the $1 million question is, as you look at today's officers, do you think that the recruits are receiving the appropriate training and preparation, or do you think that it's different now?
I think that they are. I know here in Cincinnati, and that's the perspective that I can speak from. We were a model for a lot of the cities around the country, especially after the civil unrest and we had the collaborative agreement. We became a model for a lot of the other departments around the city as far as community-oriented policing and relationships with, the citizens that we serve. So I think that here in Cincinnati, I think that, yeah, they're actually probably having to even do more training, because I think they're doing more with mental health these days, because as we're evolving, policing, thank God, is not where it should be, but it's not where it was either. And I think it's, it's constantly evolving. And I think that we in Cincinnati have tried to be on the forefront the evolution of things. And we kind of, and I'm not going to say that we just knocked politely on the door and said we need this. I mean, the door had to be kicked open, and that happened, I think, in 2001 with the civil unrest that took here with the shooting of Timothy Thomas and killing that young man.
Wow.
So.
Okay, so if we talk about the evolution of policing, the buzzword that I remember was neighborhood policing, that we were told to anticipate or expect, at least where I live, that we would see officers walking to be riding bikes. What happened to that? Would you say that that was successful, or did you find that there were problems with that?
You know what? I think it was very successful, and that is where I spent a large amount of my career. I was a community-oriented or neighborhood supervisor, police officer supervisor. So I supervised the officers who they were called COP team, community-oriented policing, neighborhood officers. Very successful because we dealt with not just, I would say we didn't deal with just the symptom of the problem. We got in and we dealt with the whole, we treated the whole problem because we dealt with quality of life issues. And a lot of times that's where stuff is coming from with people. Things just don't all of a sudden bubble up where, you have two neighbors who get in a fight or something. There's something that's systemic that happens here that, okay, so what caused that? What's going on? Okay, well, this dog, the neighbor's dog is barking every night at 9 o'clock till 2 in the morning and I can't sleep. So all of a sudden I'm mad. So now I'm gonna go over here and confront him, so then there's a fight. Instead of, so we would try to deal with, okay, so how can we work to solve the problems that are causing the bigger problems?
Wow, I think that sounds pretty proactive.
And that's what community-oriented policing was, is proactive. It's dealing with meeting the community, because traditional policing was the police going in and telling the community what's good for them. With community-oriented policing, we're like, no, we're your partners. You live here. You tell us what you need, and we will try to work with you to get that done. Not coming in telling them, look, this is your problem. This is how we're going to fix it. And that's what traditional policing, had done. And a lot of people were like, hold up, that's not what we ask you for. So.
Wow, interesting. So policing effectiveness would have been impacted by those relationships with the neighbors, because it requires you to call us. It requires you to inform us of what your needs are, so that if there's a crime, everybody doesn't dummy up and nobody saw anything and nobody is aware of anything. And so you can't be as effective if people aren't aligned with you and partnering with you.
Well, who do you tell your secrets to? You tell your secrets to people you trust. And if I'm just some officer who only shows up when there's a problem, or I need to arrest somebody in the community, that's the only time I show up, of course I'm not going to talk to you. So with community-oriented policing, we became ingrained in the community. And that was the whole objective, is you become a part of that community. You get to know the people. You may not live there, which a lot of police officers, and historically we were supposed to have to live in the city of Cincinnati, but as the bargaining unit did more, police officers started moving out to the suburbs and even being able to live in, different cities. So that took away a lot from people really knowing the community that they serve. Whereas, back in the day, somebody might even actually live in that same community. So with community-oriented policing, we had proactive things like, we would have monthly meetings, of course, where the community would either come to the district or we would go out to the community meetings and make sure, so we could hear their concerns. We had block parties, we had interactive things with them, so they knew, we had, ice cream socials, things that we would grill out sometimes in the back of the district or either at one of the parks. So they knew, and they could come and talk to us, and they got to know more than just the uniform, because, of course, and the historic nature of, especially the African-American community with the police. If you think about where policing started, let's face it, they were quote unquote actually to go out to catch the slaves
Yes.
who escaped. So
Yes.
I mean, so that's a long history, and it's not that long of why should we trust you?
Wow. Okay. Powerful response. Now, nationally, we've seen good and bad examples of policing.
Mhm.
And we now hear these public cries for defunding police departments, but I don't hear what we're replacing these police departments with. And I don't understand or support that type of communication or response. What say you about these cries? And who suffers if we defund the police?
Okay, so if we take away police resources, we know, and you know, we know who the most of the calls for police are in lower economic communities. They are communities that are underserved in other areas a lot of times, and that's why they have problems that they have. So who do you think is going to suffer? It's going to be Black and brown people and white people on the lower economic, you know, realm. So that's who's going to suffer the most. No, we don't need to defund the police. What we need to do is we need to make sure we educate more, and we hold people accountable. So I mean, defunding is not, you know, when you take away police officers, you know, I know that the communities that I served for over 22 years, I mean, they mostly look like you and me. So there's no way that I wanted to. No, don't get me wrong. You know, I served a big area where there were, you know, there were white people too, but a lot of them. I mean, most of the calls came from you don't have the calls going to mostly the rich suburbs. I mean, every now and then you might have somebody get drunk and you know somebody needs to take. Those aren't the calls that we're getting. So,
Okay. Now, we talk about diversity in the ranks of police forces because we wanted the officers to reflect the communities that they were serving. Do you think that diversity goals have been met? And if not, why not?
We'll put it like this. When I got promoted to sergeant in 1998, let me tell you, it was it was funny because the good old boys, they didn't know what to think of me. I was probably, when I got promoted, when I became a supervisor, I was probably only maybe the 5th Black woman to ever be promoted in the history of the Cincinnati Police Department to be somebody's supervisor. And I never forget, you know, going into my first roll call and, you know, the guys standing back there, arms crossed, like, you know, so, you know, I had to get in there and let them know, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm your supervisor. And, you know, you will listen to what I have to tell you. Now, what I wasn't arrogant enough to put out there is that I was young when I got promoted. I mean, I was 3 years in, and a lot of people don't get promoted till. So there was a lot of policing because I had a lot of knowledge also on my shifts. So the guys knew I had SWAT guys on my shift. So if we had to go, and this was before the matrix came out to where SWAT would be called, or say we might have somebody who fired shots or something, we had to go about something. I wasn't the arrogant supervisor to say, we're just gonna do this my way. I would meet with the guys. I would say, here, we would have a meeting point. All right, you guys are on SWAT. How do you all think we should go about doing this? Because everybody was about officer safety and trying to make sure everybody was going to go home that evening. So the guys respected that. And so I gained their respect by giving them that respect, but they knew that they needed to respect me as well. So when I first got promoted, I would say that it was a tough road to hoe. Thank goodness though, we are seeing far more since I retired 6 years ago. I've seen a number of especially Black women be promoted to different areas. We had our first Black command officer, who was Kimberly Williams, and unfortunately she passed away a couple of years ago from cancer. But then, and she was one of my mentors when I came on, and she was just a couple years older than me. Now we have Captain Danita Pettis, And I think Danita's probably going to end up being promoted to assistant chief, thank goodness. And she came in under me, and you know, and I told her, I said, go as high as you want to. You know, so we do have some parity. It's not exactly reflective of the communities, but it's gotten so far that a couple of years ago, the federal consent decree that we had, the FOP kind of filed against, you know, wanting that rescinded, because say if on a test that was taken and you had I don't know, say you had 20 candidates and the top 3 were white males. Well, for every white male that they had, you would have to reach back and grab a quote unquote protected class. So that was a Black woman, white woman, or a Black man. And so the parities have gotten a lot better. So now the consent decree is no longer in effect. Like I said, it's not exactly reflective of the community, but it's way better than it used to be. And you see way more Black officers in supervisory positions than when I first started.
Now, we all know as kids, I know when you used to go to get the Halloween outfits, there used to be a lot of policemen out there. Do you still feel that small children look at police the way that they did maybe when you and I were growing up?
And you know, I would say in the majority community, you still see little white boys. They always want to dress up as police officers. One of the things that I didn't like, Doc, when I would be out and you know, I would have a Black parent say to their kid, "Oh, I'm going to get the police officer to get you." Don't tell them that. Don't tell them you're going to get me to get them. I'm here to help them. You know, if they're acting up or something, I would say, don't tell them that. I would maybe can I talk to you? Let me pull up to the side and talk to them. But, you know, I mean, just think about it. I think it still goes back to relationships. And I would say across the board, we're seeing, you know, let's just face it, we're seeing a lot of folks who don't respect authority, period. So authority is being challenged everywhere. And so I would say that I still see it some, but not as much as it used to be. And I mean, let's face it, it's gotten tougher to be a police officer these days in this country. So
now I know our former president talked about using different technologies. That was his response to police violence in terms of alternatives to deadly force. Do you see technology moving in that direction so that deadly force isn't necessary? And in my mind, I'm trying to think, what does that mean better? Body cam? What does that mean?
Well, I would say it's body cams, and I've seen some really cool things. The taser was one of the things too, also, that really helped in not using a firearm. But they even came out with these things that look like something off of Batman that I saw not too long ago that actually shoots out and wraps the person up, you know, instead of, and I was like, you know, I felt like Batman. I felt like the Joker in Batman, like, where do you get these toys? You know, I had never used that. The taser was the biggest thing in technology when I left and retired over 6 years ago now. But yeah, I think that they are working towards, you know, let's face it, anytime police officers have to put their hands on somebody, not only do they risk hurting the person they have to put their hands on, but there's risk to the police also, the police officer themselves, you know, they often get hurt in those encounters. So I think that with technology, I also think, going back to, I said there's becoming better training, because a lot of the runs that we go on, you are dealing with people who have having some type of mental breakdown or some type of mental problem, you know. And so those are a lot of the runs where I think that now police agencies are working smarter with mental health professionals, and they're becoming more educated in those things. And you have mental health professionals who are going out on runs too with police officers.
Okay, I shared with you a chart, and it was US police shootings.
Mhm.
And it denoted that Blacks are disproportionately affected when you look at the percentage that we are in terms of the community.
Yeah.
But when you actually look at the death percentages, it's very stark. It's very alarming.
Yes.
How did you feel, and how do you feel as an African American police officer, knowing what you were trained to do, knowing how you were trained to serve, yet seeing so many examples of things that I'm sure you guys have been trained not to do?
Yeah. And yeah, and there have been some horrible examples of how people end up dead at the hands of police officers that shouldn't have. I mean, there have been a number of them here. I mean, the thing that kicked off the civil unrest here in 2001, Timothy Thomas should have never been shot. It was an accident that that officer tried to cover up then, and that the administration tried to cover up then, and the city was sick of it, and that's when that's when the jump off jumped off, right? And it should have. I mean, it makes me feel horrible when I see anybody lose their life who shouldn't at the hands of police, and let alone a lot of times, once again, when you don't know people, all you've seen is what you see on TV. And that's a prime example of what happened here. The officer who shot Timothy Thomas in that alley, guess what? He came from a rural area. Had never seen anybody who looked like us other than probably on TV. Ran, and they put him down in Over the Rhine on night shift, and he was afraid. He ran around with his gun in his hand all the time. And so when you see things like that, a lot of times these guys are afraid. They don't know how to react. All they know is the bad stuff that they've seen, and that's how they react, is with a gun. So yeah, it makes me feel horrible.
I could go through just a list of people who have been killed by the police. And, there's been this slogan, say their name. And we know that there have been numerous Black citizens killed by police, but there are going to be those who say police kill white citizens as well. What would you say?
Not at the same rate that Black people are killed. I mean, just look at, I mean, we can see with these mass shooters, a lot of them end up getting taken to Burger King and getting a malt before they even, and they're taken into custody with, no problem, or either, I mean, there was a guy in Kentucky a couple of weeks ago. He killed 3 police officers and a police dog. Now, he got beat up, but guess what? He will live to tell the tale. He will live to see his day in court, where you have the young man, and yeah, I mean, so there are some, I mean, I'm not going to say there's some bad apples out there that should not be wearing the uniform. I mean, the young man that was shot and killed in Akron, there's no justification for shooting somebody 60 times.
I know. I asked you, I was so distraught by that. I text you, I was like, Julie, they're saying that this is like protocol. Please tell me that's not protocol. But
I've never seen any protocol to shoot somebody who's running away from me anyhow. We never were to shoot at people running away from us.
Wow. 8 officers are now on paid administrative leave.
Hopefully they get fired. And if they, if there's no justification that they should have shot this young man, somebody maybe needs to go to jail too.
So you would be the person when there's an incident like that, the reporters show up, and you would have been the public information officer that has to respond to that. How would you even begin to prepare for something like that?
As a PIO, when you show up on something like that, and hopefully something that's that crazy, or that happened to a number of these high profile deaths and custodies, hopefully the chief is going to get himself out of bed, or one of the assistant chiefs, because the PIO, what I'm supposed to do is deliver what happened, the message from the police department. But a lot of times when stuff like that happens, the chief is coming out himself because I wouldn't have known what to say. If that had been here in Cincinnati and a man had been shot and killed 60 times, I probably would have been calling him, oh, you need to come answer this one. I don't have anything for them on this one. Because if you
not gonna put
put
my
me out,
face.
if you put me out there,
I'm not putting my face on this one.
exactly. They're going to be down at your office like tonight. So yeah, I can't even, you know, when we have instances where we have to use force that hurts somebody, it is our first duty to render aid. That man was still handcuffed when he got to the coroner's office. There was no aid rendered to him. And if they say it was, I'm like, how did you all render aid to him when he was still handcuffed? You're a lie. And how did you render aid to him when he had 60 holes in his body? What did y'all do? You know, so there's some things that they're not even explainable, other than there was no excuse for that. There was no excuse for it. I can't think of anything protocol about that. And I challenge anybody, any other law enforcement person around the country, talk to me, tell me where that was protocol. If they don't like my answer, call me, tell me where that was protocol.
So if someone, because I think that we need more people that look like us going into law enforcement. Should examples like that encourage us that we need more of us in law enforcement? Or do you think it's going to have the opposite effect, that we're like, I don't want to be a part of any institution or any organization that allows that?
Well, if we're not a part of something, how do we ever affect change? I mean, that would be my response. I mean, you can stand on the outside and say, I want change, I want change. But if the Sentinel Police Association had never come about with the city of Cincinnati, there wouldn't be any parity in our ranks right now. I mean, we had to kick the door in. We had to demand, we had to sue the police department for us to, you know, for us to get a fair shake at being promoted. So if we're standing on the outside and we know that police officers mostly police in areas where a lot of people look like us, why shouldn't we try to be part of the solution and part of the change? Be the change you want to see.
Well, you know, there's a global spotlight on police now.
Oh yeah. And
what changes do you think need to happen? Just overall.
Well, overall, and you know, I think that we saw a setback with the previous administration too, because I think that there was a momentum that we were really going in the right direction for a lot of things, but then we had somebody in the White House who was like, knock them in the head and all the silly stuff that used to come out of his mouth. I mean, you can't have stuff like that coming from the top down and think that, you know, the people aren't going to fall into those things, because like I said, the bad apples who are around, who don't have any regard, they're going to run with that anyhow. So I think that it needs to always start. Well, I'll say it has to start at the top, but it also has to, that's why local elections are important. We just elected the last sheriff that was elected here, Charmaine McGuffey. She's a way different type of sheriff than we used to have here in Hamilton County. You know, people aren't getting beat up at the Justice Center and stuff anymore. I mean, you know, just the crazy stuff that would go on, that they would turn and look the other way. I mean, we have to affect change, but we have to vote. We have to get out and vote on local elections. We have to demand change, but you can't demand change if nobody is holding office or nobody looks like us in those areas. Because a lot of times, you know, you're just a clanging cymbal. You're not there to help do that. So we have to get in positions to do those things. We have to demand education. We have to demand, you know, transparency.